you very much. That was terrific. Why don't we see if we've any initial questions? Do you want to sit down? Do you want to, why don't you, I think we're going to stand just because everybody's been sitting all day. So, any questions? Let me ask you one if I could. I've got one here. Let me just. You mentioned shared language as a way to get to some of these questions. I'd love you to reflect for a second of how many different people did you have to talk to come up with the shared language, and how did you know you got there, that you really had agreement among everybody? Because that seems critical here. And then I've got Regina, I think, and then and Lauren here. But please, why don't you start us off?
Okay, maybe let me start by saying I think I can't say exactly how many people we had to talk to. I know that we had to talk to 23 companies and the World Bank and UICC and the Metrics Group. And we, as you could see from our slide, the timeline, that we had many, many touch points. And I think the development of the language really was an iterative process, which means we did a proposal, we explained what we had to find and came up with, we received feedback, refined that, and so on. And I would say, I think we hesitate sometimes even to say we got it now, because we think it's something evolving. Obviously, it needs to be documented. Obviously, there is something now much more refined than it was in the beginning. But I think we still make tweaks and amendments to it, and I think it's never set, so to speak. It's really like a language. A language is evolving and never set.
Sure.
I mean, I would just add that it's not only talking with the companies, then it's also going back to the literature, reading sort of the public health literature, and now we're getting much more immersed in the business literature, because there's actually a lot of innovation happening right now in the types of. There's so much innovation in the form of these programs that I think that the language has to evolve to keep up with the innovation. So
fair enough. So let's collect a few comments. So maybe without any sort of particular rationale, we'll move from right to left. So Brenda, do you want to start, Brenda, and then Bob?
Hi, Brenda Colatrello with Merck. Merck is actually a member of the initiative, although I'm not directly involved with it. I just hear what's going on. And I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more to this debate over practicality versus rigor. I'm curious to understand what that has been in terms of the debate, and who is, kind of holding the decision rights around what is practical. Because I think we all agree that measurement is crucial. I also think there's probably agreement that rigor is important. But to be frank, what I'm hearing not only from my own company but from other companies is that the practicality piece of this is far from meeting the expectations of the industry. So I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about that.
Okay, let's take that one, Bob.
So thank you, congratulations. This is not a easy task. My question is about perhaps a potential risk to this, and that's the data integrity issue. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you optimize the quality of the data that comes into your model when you have such diverse types of data, places where they're collected, clinics, health systems, and lots of diversity there, and quality, a range of quality.
Okay, and then let's see, Lauren, do you want?
In the absence of a counterfactual, we talked about this at our group, what best demonstrates that this was most effectively done as a partnership? So I think you've done a great job talking about the M&E and the evaluation of the outcomes, the health outcomes. But how can we show that this was somehow more effective or efficient because it was done as a partnership? What's the value add of the partnership, and what are the metrics for that?
So those are three simple questions.
Right. So I mean, I think the first two we've talked a lot about within our team and with the company. So I think the point about practicality versus rigor is one that we talk with the companies every it comes up in every conversation. So I mean, I think from our perspective, it's also a learning process, learning what is practical. It's not something that's self-evident, and actually I think it's something that we hope the expectation or what is possible will actually evolve over time. So I think there's a process of instituting sort of the ideas of measurement within the company, and then I think what resources can be made available, what capacities can be built, can actually evolve over time. We're at the start of it right now, so I think that our expectations are modest. So I think the general approach is to, as sort of a base level of reporting, our thought is outputs. And it seems like that's the main thing companies are probably going to report on in the first wave. It'll be outputs on what is the scope of program activities. In a few instances, we'll be able to get a little more rigorous evaluation. But the companies that are at the point where they're ready to invest in that kind of evaluation are the ones that, you know, have a little bit of a history of understanding the value of that kind of evidence. So I think at this point, practicality is again, we're focused a little more on practicality, stressing the value of rigor and hoping that down the line there'll be opportunities to invest more in the kind of impact evaluation that'll actually yield evidence that moves us towards more and better investments in what works. Did you want to say anything on that? In terms of how to ensure quality of data, another great question. I think we feel like if we're running the Access Observatory, our name is on it, we have a responsibility to ensure that the kind of information that's in it is something that we feel like is of high enough quality to actually put out in the public. That being said, we can't go to every single project site and validate it ourselves. So our approach to solve that is to first of all have much more transparency in reporting on the processes the program used to collect the data. So a key piece of the observatory is a whole form that each program has to fill out that says exactly for every indicator they report, where it came from. I mean, it's basically a protocol. It's a study protocol on how exactly they collected the data. So part of our process is instilling in the programs, in the companies, a commitment to that kind of clear understanding of where their data come from. And it's a little bit new to some of them because a lot of times it's their NGO partner that's collecting the data. So the process has to make its way down to the point of data collection and then filter back up to the reporting system. Because the information from our perspective on the programs is only useful if you can actually, it has to be intelligible. We're using this word intelligible. A number without any explanation is not really intelligible. So the counterfactual in terms of partnerships versus I mean, it's a great question. So we've chosen, as I said at the beginning, the unit of analysis is the program, and we can't really, I think, answer that question. I think it's a great question, but I don't think that our approach allows it.
I just want to add something to the practicality versus rigor. We went through, or we had extensive interaction with companies discussing what is their data collection process at the moment, what is the data that they collect at the moment, what would be feasible. We are offering advice and support in figuring out what could be feasible in the context in which they're working. So I would love to hear back, Brenda, from your team, where they think the practicality is not to their favor. We would like to learn from these examples because I think they are applicable probably to other companies. So having the right balance is important and requires probably a very intensive listening exercise, first to understand what's done, how it's done, and then also us as a team with our expertise in data collection thinking what could be done, what do we know, and what sources are out there.
I'm going to say one more thing. And the approaches that are in part of the framework, these are approaches that have been taken up by other actors within global health and international development in general. So there's nothing, I think, but it took time. I mean, it took time for global health in general to sort of adopt these kinds of commitments to measurement. And I think that the expectation here should be that it will similarly take time.
I think we can collect a couple more. I think we've got one comment over here and then a comment over here, and then, and Regina as well. So
Thank
three
you.
more, and then we'll give you a chance to wrap.
Since this is actually about access accelerated metrics, I thought I would comment. To go back to the shared language point, I think that one of the things we have to realize about measuring the Access Accelerated Initiative and our ask of Boston University that they develop a framework through which we could measure this initiative, meaning aggregate up the results of the very diverse programs that people had, is that our companies are in very different states. So Veronika said that there was a company who actually asked, why should we measure social aims of our programs? I'll tell you that there are 10 programs who would be outraged by that statement because they do that. They write 10 papers on every program. They actually have very interesting impact data. So there's a real diversity of experience that has been highlighted through this process. Some, if you look, some of the companies are so small they don't actually have these types of programs. So they ask questions like that. But your large companies are pretty sophisticated in that space and have provided feedback throughout the process to try to enhance the framework and have given them real examples of how different things happen. So I think I think to the point of shared language, what we have tried to come to is a shared language also among the companies about how to think about very, very diverse programs, maybe hundreds of diverse programs, and how do we find a framework that allows us to identify a handful of metrics that we can use to say, okay, if I add this up, I can communicate the impact of Access Accelerated from a semi-quantitative perspective in aggregate form. The other thing I would say to the practicality versus rigor is that that's where some of it comes in. The framework is holistic. We have been very pragmatic as Access Accelerated about which ones of those we're going to actually report on, because if we gave you 1,500, I don't know what the number actually is, but say I gave you 500 metrics or 200 metrics.
60 and 60, and the most common are only 10. So
they're
not
perfect.
500.
So 60. I'm glad you added that. 60, if I gave you 60, it would be very hard to communicate at the end of the year. So we're going for a smaller number. But I think the other thing that companies are reacting to is the fact that this is a framework for a particular purpose, and it can be used to help us think through programs. But there are a lot of other different ways to do that, and companies that are already far down the path, some of them are using the theory of change, others are using other methods. And that diversity is part of what people want to see continue. Thank you. Sorry.
No,
A little long.
So I guess since we went to the left, so why don't we, Regina, and then we'll finish up, and then ask you to respond and final
Could
comments.
you go to the prior slide? Oops.
This one?
No, it was.
That's the next session.
Oops.
There's a preview.
There we go. This one?
Yes, I was confused, and maybe it's the nature of the project you're trying to map out, but transparency to whom public? Why just public for transparency? I mean, usually the first challenge is among the partners, among whatever criteria they think it's important to share. And I guess you're assuming that it's transparency from private to public. No? So I don't understand.
Jump in?
Why don't we let the last comment come in, and then maybe we can wrap up. The transparency, so please, and use the speaker, and identify yourself, yes.
Sorry, I'm Hannah Kettler from the Gates Foundation. And thanks a lot. I really am excited about the work you're doing, and I know we've had conversations about it. And I also just want to acknowledge, I think it's really impressive and important, the embrace of impact measurement as part of the Access Accelerated, and really going forward as a group of companies to do that, acknowledging the diversity issues you flagged. But I think it's really significant because it's been missing, not just from your programs, but in general, I think in partnerships and in global health. So I think you taking a step forward and not shying away from also showing bad data to the extent, and that's kind of a question, not a challenge, but I think there's a real opportunity also to early on share some lessons about things that haven't worked potentially. And I know we've got CEOs talking and groups of people coming together, but I was curious about capacity to do the evaluations, and I started to ask that question, then you referred to it. Are you basing, is the work all being done by the companies or the programs themselves and you're the collector, or are you actually investing in additional capacity to do evaluation at the program level?
So why don't you take those comments, and then any other closing comments you want, please.
Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity. So just quickly to this slide and the question that was very specific to the public. I just used, so to speak, the same terminology that was on the matrix that Michael Reich presented in the morning, in which he distinguished between making data available to the public. That means to everyone, or making it only available to the board. I remember in his example, he had some cells filled in this table by, let's say, the data is only made available to the board, or the data is only made available to a certain set of stakeholders. So what I wanted to express is, in other words, the data for these programs will be available to everyone, internally and externally. So Regina, I hope that answers your question. And then, yes, with the capacity, I think that's an excellent point. And we have started, as you know, initiatives to involve a lot of other academic institutions or institutions in general that are interested in monitoring evaluation. So that is one of our aims, to be a convener for these institutions coming together, because we feel that there is actually a gap of capacity, that many evaluations have taken place in other parts, or partners have not been specifically interested in engaging in topic access to medicine. So definitely it's I think a tremendous opportunity, but also a challenge to start and mobilizing the community that would be interested in doing these evaluations.
Yeah, but again, I think it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So we've spoken with some companies that would prefer to build internal capacity to do some of these things. Whether that's an efficient use of their resources is up to each company to decide. But I think for the most part, there's not a strong case to be made for them to build internal capacity to do some of the more advanced measurement activities. And so I think many of them already have academic partners they like to work with. And so partly what we're trying to do is reach out to those folks and sort of build a network on the academic side, not just academics, I mean, other groups that can support.
Let me just, please go.
And just in general, any feedback is highly appreciated. So even if it's not formally shared here, but please contact us, let us know. And Brenda, let us know from your team. So we are in this process. We are really going through that process, and it's an opportunity to take in feedback and really adapt the process according to that. Thank you.